Ron DeSantis has officially ended his campaign as of January 21st, 2024, before the New Hampshire primary. So I wanted to step back and take this time to look at an overall review of the DeSantis presidential campaign. What went wrong and what went right? Now, let me clarify a few things. It's very easy, since he's now pulled out, to think about all the things that DeSantis did wrong. Hindsight is 2020. I was not on the DeSantis presidential campaign advisory team, so who knows if maybe they even tried to follow some of the advice that I'm about to give and it just didn't play out that way. I don't know. But as someone who has just watched political campaigns and see how they perform and understood the general arc of marketing and politics, I wanted to just give you guys a few insights as to why I think DeSantis performed so poorly. So let's step back. And I think the main statement that I want you guys to remember is DeSantis really should not have run to begin with. I say that because, in essence, I believe we are in this kind of Trump arc. Even though human history is not necessarily some fictional story, humans like how stories begin and how they end. Human life often has that crescendo all the way to the end. And so, even in politics, we see a lot of times where we want the politician to have some kind of arc in their story, and they need to either burn out in flames or they need to win. There needs to be some epic moment. And I think since Trump has come on stage in 2015, American politics have been only about him. And it's always been about, do you hate him or do you like him? And everything has been a digression of that. Even the DeSantis campaign at the end of the day was all about Donald Trump. So why enter the campaign when really it's not about you? It's about somebody else. From that point on, I knew DeSantis was doomed to fail. And part of DeSantis' strategy was really just a backup to really see if Trump's lawsuits and the various corruption and cases behind him were going to doom him to failure. As it so happens, they did not. So starting with that first point, I think that's the main reason that we saw DeSantis get crushed. We saw him have some kind of momentum coming out of the gates, but at the end of the day, that momentum died and DeSantis failed. But let's step back and let's think of some strategies that I think could have gone differently that maybe would have shaped his campaign a little bit better. First, he launched on Twitter. A lot of people said, hey, that was cool, but it was an incredibly stupid move. Why was it a stupid move? Because DeSantis is I think, a decent looking politician. His wife is very beautiful, and he's got a very beautiful looking family. What that means is it's pleasing to the eyes. He's very aesthetic. He should have launched on Fox News Network, given some speech for everybody to see for a very picturesque, photo-esque moment to show that presence. Twitter Spaces was just a voice, and it was just kind of a way to hear someone speak almost over the radio. But as we know, we're beyond radio now. So whoever his advisors were at the time messed up from the get-go by not really utilizing DeSantis and his looks. He should have been more present on TV and then gone into the Twitter Spaces. Now, there were some other mistakes that were made there too. The fact that who were most primary voters? They're boomers. Most young people in Gen X simply don't vote in the primaries. The numbers show that. So why would you go to X, which is such a specific crowd and a specific bubble, to launch a presidential campaign for a primary when we all know that the majority of the people who are going to watch and vote for you are going to be watching on TV? If anything, he should have also done radio, because that exact same voter base would have also been listening on the radio. But no, he chose X. So I think that was a really big mistake. And the media kind of played up that mistake when X actually had some issues. The DeSantis team actually did a kind of good about face. There was a trending Twitter, DeSantis broke the internet. It was kind of some fake memery. Everyone knew that wasn't true. Everyone knew it was actually just X having issues, which also kind of stunted the campaign. But like any good campaign team and good campaign managers, they actually pivoted that into the perfect talking point, saying that DeSantis broke the internet. So they actually did very good with that, his campaign strategists. But once again, the very fact of launching on X was a big mistake. Mistake number two: DeSantis should have gone after Trump hard from the beginning. But DeSantis was very wishy washy. And if you look at the arc of his campaign, it was actually incredibly stupid at what points and how he went after Trump. He should have made his divergences, his differences with Trump clear from the get go. He should have gone hard on attacking him when he was at the height and really not diversified, but created a line between himself and Trump from the very beginning. But DeSantis was very soft on Trump in the beginning. DeSantis wouldn't come out and be outright negative. He was very kind of weak and tried to kind of cater to Trump when he should have been attacking him hardcore. Then as things progressed, then Trump started to attack. Then DeSantis started to attack Trump. Then DeSantis decided, hey, I'm going to turn up the heat. All as his campaign was coming toward the end, that made him appear weak. And by then, the voters had kind of already decided. DeSantis had a very small timeline in order to grab a majority of Trump supporters, bring them over to his side with some very lasting impressions. He didn't do that. So he should have been hard on Trump from the beginning. And then, if anything, gone softer on him toward the end and sympathized with him almost exactly like Vivek Ramaswamy. It's interesting to see the differences between a DeSantis and a Vivek, because Vivek, I think, understood the moment that we are in. Vivek understood that we are in the Trump archetype, that we are still in the Trump show. And that's why he tried to go further right than Trump and say that Trump did an amazing job and never really attacked Trump until the very end of his campaign, where he just said that he thinks that he would be better. But now Vivek's endorsed Trump, as now has DeSantis. But DeSantis' big mistake was he should have been hard on Trump from the beginning if he was serious about it, and then softer toward the end. Where things, I think, get worse is DeSantis' overall political and campaign strategy. Because had DeSantis had launched his campaign, a third point I think you should think about is he should have taken the Tim Scott approach. What Tim Scott did was he just grifted off the people who gave him money, further entrenched his power in South Carolina, and then dropped out of the race. I think DeSantis should have done something similar. He should have spent 3 months collecting as much anti-Trump money as possible and then quitting. Who would have cared? He wouldn't have gone into any big fight with Trump. He would have drained resources from the Nikki Haley's of the world. And he would have made out by hopefully making himself more politically powerful in Florida by enriching his friends here. But he didn't do that. Unfortunately, he spent a majority of his money actually progressing toward the campaign. I think another mistake of his, probably mistake number 4, was his heavy focus on Iowa, because that meant that if he didn't win Iowa, it was downhill from there, as opposed to the Nikki Haley strategy, which was come third in Iowa, second New Hampshire, first in South Carolina. DeSantis bet it all on coming out first in Iowa. And whatever the polls were saying, DeSantis obviously was not listening. It was very obvious that Trump was going to win Iowa, even though DeSantis had a solid boots on the ground game. Now, it's of course very hard to tell. Once again, hindsight's 2020. There could have been an upset. And in fact, had Nikki Haley not run, DeSantis probably would have gotten a lot of those Nikki Haley votes and would have done incredibly well in Iowa, maybe even coming neck and neck with Trump, but that's not how things turned out. What's interesting is how I think his campaign ended. And even how he ended his campaign, I'm not entirely sure was the best. Now, he ended his campaign by dropping out before New Hampshire, probably not wanting to come in third place, and he endorsed Donald Trump. And of course, Trump very quickly made up with DeSantis. He retired the DeSanctimonious name and said he's willing to become friends with him now. But what I think one strategy for DeSantis could have been was to actually stay in for New Hampshire and South Carolina, specifically to just hurt Nikki Haley, go very hard against Nikki Haley, and maybe negotiate with Trump about what a future the both of them might have if he decides to turn on Nikki Haley and try to support Trump, kind of like Vivek did. The big question is, do DeSantis voters go toward Trump or do they go toward Nikki Haley? I think a lot of them are probably going to go to Nikki Haley, actually, depending. During the last part of DeSantis's campaign, a lot of these people simply just became very anti-Trump, and you actually see that amidst his campaign staff and a lot of his campaigners on Twitter now, where now they're just irrationally attacking Trump and very anti-Trump, not understanding that this is the political game. One benefit to people like Trump is how quickly they make up for these differences and come together to, I think, fight the bigger mission. DeSantis endorsed Trump. Maybe he's willing to do that, but his staff certainly aren't and are certainly very bitter. And now they're lumping themselves in with the Never Trumpers, which, if anything, gives the Trump people more of an air of gloating, because one thing the Trump people have said is that the people backing DeSantis were never for America and already looped them in with that Never Trump crowd to begin with. So even the end of DeSantis's campaign, I'm not entirely sure was appropriate. But overall, we see this giant failure in understanding, I think, is my final point, in memetics. DeSantis, unfortunately, always walked a fine line with how he talked. He infamously was very careful with his interviews. I know a lot of people who, big names, who would have had him on Spotify, would have had him on YouTube, would have had him on more Twitter spaces. Vivek and RFK Jr. go on any platform, and even Trump to some extent goes on different kind of edgy podcasts like the All In podcast. DeSantis did none of that. He kind of, like a Biden, hid in his basement. And that was because his donors. And DeSantis is a good case study when the actual politician himself does not exactly align with what his donors want. Now, DeSantis wanted to be president, but DeSantis is not an anti-Trump guy. In fact, a lot of his policies were kind of hinting at being more extreme than Trump. But DeSantis's donors were all never Trump people. And so DeSantis was walking a fine line between wanting to grab Trump's voters, but then also please his donors. When you're walking a fine line like that, you simply can't say much. And when you can't say much, very little moments are allotted to you to become a memeable person. Of course, personalities are different. And as Hillary Clinton learned, as DeSantis has now learned, and maybe even as Vivek and Joe Biden have learned, you can't pay people to meme for you. Memes are the epitome of organic material. They have to come naturally. You can't just make these moments and try to use them with propaganda to promote them. We know that's true because we've seen it tried by multi-million-dollar PR firms who fail time and time and again. DeSantis was just not a memeable presidential campaigner. And that's all because of the fine line that he walked. Now, once again, maybe that strategy could have worked at a different time and a different place, but it was not going to work in 2024. So where do we go from here? I think DeSantis is still going to have a bright career, assuming he does not primary someone like a Rick Scott and lose again. I think he's going to double down on Florida. And now the next year for DeSantis will be figuring out how to secure his legacy here in the Sunshine State. He has a whole nother year for legislative session. He has a whole nother year to make an impact. And he has a wife who potentially might try to become Florida's future governor. Maybe DeSantis will run for president in 2028. Certainly a lot of people still like him, but he has to keep up his momentum, and that's very hard to do. I think DeSantis has a very bright future as long as he plays his cards right and fires all of his current advisors.